I've heard people say that the problem with young people these days is that they don't know how to think critically. But I don't think the problem is only with young people. Today, I'll explain what critical thinking is, why it matters, how it affects our faith, and how we can cultivate this skill. Welcome to Life Repurposed. This is where midlife meets inspiration, practical guidance, and renewed purpose amid life's evolving chapters. We navigate faith questions and messy, uncertain twists with humor and a commitment to pursue treasure even in the hard stuff. I'm your host, Michelle Rayburn, the author of books and Bible studies about finding hope in the trashy stuff of life. Do people today know how to think critically? I'm questioning this more and more. I'm questioning it in my own reactions often. The challenge is that we know how to be critics or critical, but not to critically process things. These two are not the same. So being a critic means passing judgment or expressing negative opinions about something. We're good at that. On the other hand, thinking critically means analyzing and evaluating information or situations in a deeper way. It's about asking questions, examining evidence, and considering different perspectives before forming an opinion. Think of it as putting on your detective hat and trying to uncover the truth behind things. I love being a CSI expert from my armchair couch kind of position in all other areas of life. So here's the thing. When we are becoming this kind of a detective, it's for our thoughts. It's about looking at things with a skeptical eye and asking questions and trying to figure out what's really going on. It's not just accepting things at face value, but taking the time to really understand them. This is about being curious, being open-minded, and being willing to change your mind when you learn new information. Basically, it's about thinking for yourself and not just going along with the crowd. When we were younger, we were not inherently less likely to have critical thinking skills. But critical thinking is a skill that can be cultivated and improved over time with practice and experience. And the more experience we have, the more we can process complex information. Children and adolescents are still in the process of that cognitive development, so they may be learning the foundations of critical thinking, such as basic reasoning and problem-solving skills, but they might not yet have fully developed these abilities to the same extent as adults or older adults, so we do sort of expect them to be more impulsive just because they don't have the life experience. However, those who have access to educational experiences that emphasize critical thinking skills, like inquiry-based learning or problem-based learning, may develop these skills earlier and more effectively. So I'm essentially saying that age and wisdom don't always go together. Younger generations have grown up in a digital age with access to vast amounts of information and technology. And while technology can enhance certain aspects of critical thinking, such as information literacy and research skills, it also presents challenges, such as potential distractions and reliance on quick answers rather than on deep analysis. Older people typically have more life experience to draw on, which can contribute to those development of those skills, those critical thinking skills. However, this does not mean that younger people are incapable of critical thinking. It also does not mean that older people always are capable of critical thinking. We may approach these problems and make decisions differently based on our unique perspectives and experiences. And now that the midlife generation has access to the same digital technology, and really it's become central to our lives, we might be more tempted to believe the first thing we see on our favorite news source or the first thing we see on our phone. If you see more and more people saying they got hacked, I put that in quotation marks, it's because they probably clicked on something that just caught their attention and they didn't catch that it was a fake. So We might be passing along misinformation without thinking it through. We might find ourselves in vulnerable situations where we believe a complete lie and get in all kinds of trouble. And we might have opinions about policy when it comes to government or our churches or other places without truly thinking it through from all angles. Before we talk about what critical thinking is in a little more depth, what is the opposite of critical thinking? Well, one way of referring to it is uncritical acceptance. This mindset involves accepting information or beliefs without questioning or evaluating them critically. Instead of analyzing the evidence, considering alternative perspectives, and then applying logical reasoning, people may rely on intuition, emotions, or even authority figures to form their opinions and make decisions. And we're finding more and more that those authority figures are not always reliable, whether it's politicians or lately, sometimes it's church leaders, maybe it's community leaders. We're seeing more and more moral failures in those places. And so those authority figures aren't always as reliable. So if we're just blindly following somebody and taking their opinions and making our decisions, we're going to find ourselves heading down a wrong path. Uncritical acceptance can manifest in various ways. One can be acceptance of beliefs without evidence, maybe looking at ideas without looking for any evidence or rational justification. This can mean relying on tradition and personal biases instead of looking at a critical analysis. Another is uncritical thinkers might resist or dismiss alternative perspectives, preferring to maintain their existing beliefs without considering contradictory evidence or viewpoints. Uncritical thinkers may lack skepticism and may be more susceptible to misinformation or manipulation. Skepticism is not a bad thing. When you're a skeptic, you're going, is that true? I've got to look into this a little bit more. Instead of accepting information at face value without questioning whether it's valid or reliable. Uncritical thinkers, or those who are uncritically accepting of information, may be rigid in their thinking, refusing to consider that new information, or closed-minded and resistant to change. Uncritical thinkers may be swayed by emotional appeals rather than logical arguments, maybe making decisions based on feelings rather than on evidence or reason. So overall, uncritical acceptance of ideas can lead to a shallow understanding of issues and a reluctance to challenge our beliefs or assumptions. It contrasts with critical thinking, which emphasizes analytical reasoning, evidence evaluation, and open-mindedness in approaching complex issues and making informed decisions. So let's look at how critical thinking applies to how we approach faith and our religious beliefs, because this isn't just about what's happening in society. First, critical thinking encourages the questioning of assumptions, including those related to faith and religious doctrine. Rather than just accepting beliefs blindly, people who think critically may explore the reasoning behind religious teachings or consider alternative perspectives. They also evaluate the evidence supporting the religious beliefs and doctrines, considering historical, philosophical, and scientific perspectives mixed in there. They may seek rational justifications for their faith and engage in thoughtful inquiry to reconcile religious teachings with the evidence that they see. Critical thinking equips people with the tools to navigate doubt and uncertainty in matters of faith. Rather than viewing doubt as a threat to faith, they may see it as an opportunity for deeper exploration and spiritual growth. And this seeking of understanding through questions and inquiry and reflection ultimately leads to a deeper faith. Critical thinkers are open to engaging with diverse perspectives, not threatened by people from a different faith tradition or a non-believer. They may appreciate the richness of the religious diversity and recognize the value of dialogue and how it deepens their understanding of their own faith and spirituality. Through critical reflection, people may re-examine traditional religious teachings and practices and seek to reinterpret them in light of their contemporary values and ethics and the social context. And this process of reinterpretation can lead to a more dynamic and evolving understanding of faith. This critical thinking fosters ethical reflection and moral reasoning within our religious contexts. We may evaluate the ethical implications of religious teachings and consider how our faith informs our actions and our relationships with others. And this is especially true of some of the moral issues I've thought through in my lifetime, where I once had a really black and white understanding of certain issues. And then now later I'm seeing, and I hear this word nuance everywhere, but I can't think of a better word, so I have to say it. It's like this more nuanced approach in looking at, wow, this affects this group of people in this way and this group of people in that way. And it really changes then how we see the world and how we understand our own faith. And so it changes our actions, it changes our relationship with others. Critical thinkers prioritize authenticity in their beliefs and their practices and strive to align their faith with their personal values and their experiences, rejecting the doctrine of legalism in favor for a more personal and meaningful expression of faith. Critical thinking encourages people to explore the deeper questions of meaning and purpose in life, including the role of faith in shaping our worldview. They may approach faith as a source of inspiration, guidance, and existential meaning while remaining open to ongoing exploration and growth. In other words, we have answers and we have faith to stand on, but we don't have all the answers, and we continue to explore and seek understanding. Exploring these less rigid religious views in our midlife especially can open up a wide array of related topics that intersect with rejecting things like patriarchy and living with less legalism. And one of the reasons I've tackled a lot of these topics on the podcast is that I'm personally processing a lot of things in a different way now that my life experience blends with information and tradition and biblical study and new understandings of things. In today's digital age, technology has transformed the way we also interpret Scripture and engage with our Christian beliefs. We have access to a wealth of resources beyond the traditional Bibles and commentaries, and we now have the ability to explore Scripture from various angles and perspectives. Through online platforms, digital libraries, and other resources, we can dig deeper into those nuances of biblical passages and seek insight from multiple commentaries and scholarly analysis. And this is not something that was available to me before. I had one study Bible. I owned one Bible with some footnotes. I had a commentary that I looked at sometimes, and that's all I had. And I'm not saying we should take all the human understanding and that's what we found our whole life on, but I will tell you that commentaries and looking at different translations of Scripture and other people's commentaries about them has really expanded my understanding of biblical knowledge. And so having these resources and being able to just open up software and read 12 different commentaries on something gives me an angle of this person says this and this one says this, and it makes me have to critically think about it because sometimes those commentaries are conflicting. And so I have to go back to the Scripture then and say, well, what do I see here? This expanded access to information has then broadened our understanding of key theological concepts, even things like what's called soteriology, which is the doctrine of salvation. It has challenged our traditional interpretations of Scripture, particularly in our views in areas such as roles of men and women and what we see in Scripture. So as we navigate these diverse perspectives, critical thinking plays a crucial role in discerning truth and shaping our spiritual practices. In our search for meaning and belonging within the Christian community, the role of community itself and this belonging takes on a new significance. As our beliefs evolve and our understanding of Scripture deepens, we may find ourselves seeking out supportive communities that align with our own evolving spiritual journey. So whether that's your local congregation, an online forum, a small group discussion, finding community that embraces diversity of thought and fosters open dialogue becomes essential. In these spaces, critical thinking is not only encouraged, but celebrated as we engage in thoughtful reflection and mutual encouragement. So I don't know where you find your source of encouragement, but maybe as you have begun to process through and think, you have sought other connections. Now, think of this as Looking for people who are also willing to have open conversations and dialogue, not seeking out somebody who thinks exactly like you and therefore you just become a little bubble, because those bubbles is the danger. That's where I've lived for a lot of my life. So I'm not advocating for that bubble mentality. I'm just saying that if you're finding yourself in a place where you're not surrounded by people who really care to think critically, sometimes it means we look in other places to begin to find that open dialogue and that critical thinking where we can really wrestle with scriptural concepts and figure out how do we live this out in our life. Beyond our religious doctrine, critical thinking extends to the exploration of moral frameworks and the philosophies and the things that are covered by concepts like compassion and justice and equality. And as we grapple with these complex moral issues and the challenges we see in society, we are called to examine our beliefs and our values with this intellectual honesty and integrity. And so it's not just formed on, tradition or what we've always done, but we start to look at are we living out what this says? Am I practicing what I believe? This process of the ethical questions allows us to go beyond the legalistic interpretations of Scripture and really cultivate a deeper understanding of the ethics that are inherent in our faith. The relationship between faith and reason lies at the heart of our spiritual journey. As we seek to reconcile our spiritual beliefs with critical thinking and rational inquiry, we're invited into a deeper exploration of truth and meaning. Rather than viewing faith and reason as opposing forces, we discover that they can coexist in harmony. They can enrich our understanding of Scripture and deepen our relationship with God. And finally, as we consider the cultural and historical context of religious traditions, we recognize the dynamic nature of faith and the potential for reinterpretation and evolution over time. By critically examining the cultural biases, the historical influences that shape our beliefs and our practices, we open ourselves up to new insights and perspectives. This ongoing process of reevaluation and reflection allows us to embrace change with humility and openness as we continue to grow and evolve on our spiritual journey. Critical thinking then serves as a guiding principle in our exploration of changing views. And for me, it's been of rejecting patriarchy and living with less legalism. And in midlife, I've been wrestling with these things and engaging with these topics. And I have this intellectual curiosity. And this is a journey of personal growth and spiritual transformation. And because of the podcast, I'm inviting you alongside to walk through that journey with me. Through reflection, discussion, a commitment to our lifelong learning, then we navigate these complexities of faith with humility and grace, and we seek truth and understanding in the midst of whatever uncertainty keeps coming up. So how do we improve our critical thinking skills? Improving our critical thinking skills is all about developing some practical habits that we can work on every day. First, let's talk about curiosity. It's like being a perpetual question asker. Instead of just accepting things at face value, we dive in and we ask why. We become 3-year-olds in our theology and in our thoughts about the society around us, and we ask why. For instance, when we hear a news story, we wonder about the source. We look at the biases. We look at the angles that are involved, and we ask a lot of questions. Next up, analytical skills are like having a mental toolbox. We break down big problems into bite-sized pieces. It's like solving a puzzle. So say we're trying to decide on a new job. Instead of just thinking about the salary or the benefits, insurance benefits, we look at factors like company culture, growth opportunities, and work-life balance. We look at a lot of factors in making those decisions. Evaluating evidence is like being a detective. We examine clues and carefully separate fact from fiction. For example, if we're researching a health claim online, we would check the credibility of the sources. We would look for supporting evidence. We'd watch out for any red flags or bias that comes in with that. Now let's get creative. Critical thinking isn't just about following the rules, it's about breaking them too. Imagine we're brainstorming ideas for, say, a school project. Instead of sticking to the tried and true, we might throw in some wild and wacky ideas to see where they lead us. And so there's some experimentation and some brainstorming that comes too, because if it's just about following rules, we end up right back at the start and there is no critical thinking involved. Reflection is like hitting the pause button on life. We take a step back and we think about our own thoughts. Let's say we had a heated argument with a friend or with our spouse. Instead of brushing it off, we would reflect on what triggered the argument, how we reacted, and what we could do differently next time. So we're not looking at it as if it's a single layer, but that it's multi-layered. Reading and writing critically is like being a literary detective. We read between the lines. We look for hidden meanings, hidden agendas. When we write an essay, we support our arguments with evidence. We would anticipate counter arguments and make sure our ideas flow logically. And that's how we want to process our thoughts in real life, too. And then the other thing we want to do is seek feedback. This is like having a reality check. We bounce our ideas off others to see if they hold up. If we were working on a creative project, we would ask for feedback from friends or colleagues to get different perspectives and look for any blind spots we might have missed. And that's what we want to do with our thoughts too. Bounce them off other people who we trust and see what they think of it too. See if they've done some investigating. So embracing challenges then becomes sort of like going to the mental gym. We push ourselves out of our comfort zones to build some mental muscle. And so it's just like gaining any new skill, like playing an instrument. We tackle our challenges and we stretch our abilities and we grow. Learning from our mistakes then also becomes like stepping stones. Instead of beating ourselves up over failures, we see them as opportunities to learn and grow. And we don't give up altogether. We learn from our mistakes and we try again. That is the heart of Life Repurposed. And then the other thing that goes along with this in learning how to be a critical thinker is active listening and dialogue. We bounce ideas back and forth with others, like a ping pong match. We keep the conversation going. We discuss a topic and we listen attentively in between. So we bounce the ideas back and forth. It's not lecturing, but it's listening and speaking and asking questions and sharing our own thoughts. This back and forth then becomes an informed discussion. It doesn't become an argument when we're carefully listening to understand and ask questions. When we incorporate these habits into our daily lives, we can become better critical thinkers. We make informed decisions and we navigate all those twists and turns of life with confidence and creativity because we're looking at it from multiple angles. Now, how does this affect our Bible study? What does critical thinking look like there? Well, practicing critical thinking when we're studying the Bible or even when we're listening to sermons involves actively engaging with the text and the message in a thoughtful and discerning way. One practical way to do this is by asking questions that deepen your understanding. For instance, when reading a biblical passage, you might ask questions like, what is the main message or theme? How does this passage relate to the other parts of the Bible? What historical and cultural context is important for interpreting this passage? When we ask those questions, we start to uncover deeper insights and we gain a richer understanding of the text. Now, when I talk about deeper insights, it's really important to say that I'm not talking about like some hidden meaning in that, like, I've heard people say that they want to study the scripture to find out what God really meant by it. There's a danger there because we start to insert our own thinking into that. And so that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm actually talking about really looking at the historical context behind something. And this is why when last week I talked about letting go of patriarchy and changing my views of men and women in scripture, it really had to do with looking at some of the historical and cultural context behind what the Apostle Paul was saying when he was speaking to men and women. And so asking questions, scholars have uncovered some cultural insights that have really helped us to understand the text. Not like decoding a secret message, but just saying, oh, well, based on this cultural insight, this makes a whole lot more sense here. Another way to practice critical thinking is by evaluating different interpretations of scripture. So when you see that there are various interpretations and we see how in different sermons or study materials we see interpretations, it helps us to understand. We can look at like evidence and reasoning that are supported by these interpretations. We can assess their consistency with the broader context of Scripture. Or, for example, if a sermon represents a particular interpretation, we consider how well it aligns with other passages in the Bible and whether it is supported by historical and cultural context. And then looking at, when I say different interpretations, we're looking at how we see Scripture, but along with that comes looking at different translations of Scripture, because the way something is translated, believe it or not, can have a bias. There are different theological angles of different people who have translated Scripture, and so sometimes the translation and even pronouns that are chosen are based on the translator's bias. So when we look at multiple translations, it just adds to our understanding and helps us to absorb what we see. It's also important to examine your own assumptions and biases whenever you engage with the text or when you listen to a sermon. Reflect on how your personal beliefs may interpret how you influence how you interpret Scripture. And be open to challenging those preconceived notions. For instance, if you have a strong opinion on a certain theological issue, consider how this opinion might color your interpretation of all the related passages in the Bible. And when you become aware of that bias, then it helps to actually step back a little bit and approach the text with a greater openness to new insights. It's important to seek out diverse perspectives on a passage or a topic that's being discussed. So this is why I like using some commentaries, engaging in group discussions, listening to sermons from different theological traditions, even if I know ahead of time I probably won't agree. By considering these multiple viewpoints, it helps us to gain a broader understanding of the text and appreciate the complexity. And actually, it helps me to re-examine whether or not I still believe what I thought I believed. So it's not like, it's not a threat to me to hear somebody else explain a different perspective. When we study that historical and cultural context in the Bible, it gives us an understanding of the world in which the text was written. So, for example, if we're studying a passage from the Old Testament and look at the historical events and cultural practices in the ancient Near East that may have influenced the composition, then it helps us to avoid misinterpreting what that word of Scripture is saying. Now, it's important to remain open-minded and willing to consider new ideas and perspectives. We want to approach the study of the Bible and listening to sermons with humility and recognize there's always more to learn. We want to be open to evaluating our beliefs and interpretations in light of new information or insights. By practicing these strategies, you can cultivate a more critical and thoughtful approach to studying the Bible and deepening your understanding of Scripture, which ultimately enriches your spiritual journey. What would happen if more people practiced critical thinking? Well, this can have a significant impact on society as a whole, whether it's choosing a political candidate or evaluating healthcare options or making financial decisions. Critical thinkers are better equipped to navigate those complex issues and make choices that align with their values and goals. It also creates a resilience to misinformation. In an area of rampant misinformation and news that is biased, critical thinking serves as a powerful defense. By teaching ourselves, like training ourselves to question sources and evaluate the evidence, we can discern fact from fiction. And critical thinking then helps inoculate us against the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories because it promotes a more informed and discerning public conversation. Ultimately, critical thinking also leads to conflict resolution. I know it might sound like it leads to conflict. However, critical thinking fosters empathy and understanding and open-mindedness because we are considering things from multiple angles. And when we are open to looking at all of the information, it ultimately makes it easier to resolve conflicts and bridge divides. Maybe we're not trying to change someone else's opinion, but we're learning to consider those diverse perspectives and then engaging in that respectful dialogue and evaluating our own assumptions. So critical thinking then promotes constructive communication, mutual understanding, even in the face of disagreement. It also fuels innovation and drives progress because it encourages creative problem solving and out-of-the-box thinking. When we challenge the status quo and question conventional wisdom, when we explore new ideas, critical thinkers then drive the innovation. And this is where science and technology and business and other fields see the advancements because somebody decides to think outside of the box. It encourages people to consider also the ethical implications of their actions and decisions. And so these ethical frameworks help us to consider the rights and interests of others, to make decisions that prioritize compassion and justice and integrity, ultimately fostering a more ethical and morally responsible society. On a personal level, critical thinking fosters intellectual curiosity, personal growth, and fulfillment. By encouraging people to challenge themselves intellectually and explore new ideas and expand those horizons, critical thinking enriches our lives and promotes lifelong learning, which leads to a greater fulfillment and well-being. I find it really fun to learn something new. I find it fun to challenge myself and to explore things that I would never study about or read about because it pushes me to understand something that I didn't understand before. And sometimes I just have to sample it because certain things are just way outside of my ability to understand. But getting a little bit of understanding cultivates that curiosity. And overall, the widespread cultivation of critical thinking skills has the potential to foster a more informed and resilient and compassionate society where people then are empowered to make thoughtful decisions, engage in that constructive dialogue, and work toward common goals. And it's for the betterment of all. Now, this affects our faith too. Learning to think critically can have a profound impact on how we approach faith and our religious beliefs. And this is why it's important to do those things I was talking about when I said we can be intentional about fostering this critical thinking. Why? Because applying critical thinking skills such as analysis, evaluation, and interpretation to our Christian studies, we can gain a deeper understanding of faith and its implications in our lives. So rather than just accepting beliefs uncritically and not asking any questions, instead we engage in a process of questioning and exploring that leads us to a stronger personal understanding of our faith. It encourages us to reconcile our faith with rational and intellectual thoughts. Now, this is a key because rather than viewing faith and reason as opposing forces, critical thinkers recognize the compatibility of faith and reason, and we seek to integrate both into our spiritual journey. So if you've always thought that, well, faith can't be rational and I can't be rational and have, it's not that way. It actually does go together with our spiritual journey. Critical thinking encourages us to engage in those diverse perspectives and that diversity of thought, that open dialogue that I talked about. And really, the why here is cultivating empathy and respect for different beliefs and practices. So rather than thinking there's only one way to live out my Christian faith, I realize that the way somebody worships down the street is different from what I do. And yet we are all on this path of worshiping God. Now, I'm not saying all religions are the same. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying that the way we practice our faith can be very different from somebody else. And rather than conforming to rigid doctrines or societal expectations, the critical thinking then encourages us to discern our beliefs, our values, our spiritual practices, and it leads us to seek more authenticity. This may sound surprising, but asking critical questions helps us develop a resilience to doubt and uncertainty. Does that sound the opposite of what you've always thought? Critical thinking equips us with the tools to navigate doubt and uncertainty and spiritual crisis. By engaging in critical reflection and seeking out diverse perspectives and looking at those, like actually embracing the intellectual challenges, we can develop a resilient faith that's capable of adapting and evolving in response to life's complexities. So instead of just an "I told you so," and then what happens when something hits us that's so opposite of what we've always thought, we aren't equipped to handle it. If it's like, well, that goes completely against what I thought, and now this faith crisis makes me fall apart. Instead of that, learning to think critically can enrich and deepen our faith, and it leads us to be more equipped to handle those changes that come in life. We don't see it as a threat to our faith. Instead, the ups and downs that we go through enhance our spiritual journey and lead us to a deeper appreciation of the richness and complexity of our faith. If you grew up in an environment where questions were considered a sin, I want you to listen here. Many people have a hard time accepting the idea that critical thinking can enrich their faith for several reasons. One common concern is the fear of challenging deeply held beliefs or encountering like a cognitive dissonance between. For some people, questioning faith or engaging in this critical examination of religious teachings may feel threatening or destabilizing. Maybe you worry that critical thinking will lead you to abandon your faith altogether rather than deepen your understanding of it. I want to assure you that asking questions and thinking critically does not lead to abandoning faith. It may lead to abandoning some practices that you realize were not really aligned with the Bible, but ultimately, when you start to think critically, you can start to sort and separate and see where you've been influenced by tradition more than the Bible. There may also be some cultural or social factors at play that discourage critical inquiry within religious communities. Some religious traditions emphasize unquestioning faith, total obedience to authority, which leads people to view critical thinking as incompatible with religious beliefs. And in these environments, there may be a pressure to conform or to avoid questioning any teachings, which then actually hinders the development of those critical thinking skills. And personally, I think this is why so many people in the Christian realm have fallen for conspiracies. So, if somebody mistakenly equates critical thinking with skepticism or atheism or anything like that and assumes that it means rejecting religious beliefs, this is a problem because it shuts down rational thinking. If we make it feel as if asking questions is a danger zone, oh, you're stepping into atheism or unbelief. No. Instead, critical thinking is not inherently opposed to faith, but it encourages us to engage thoughtfully with beliefs and asking questions and seeking deeper understanding. In a world overflowing with information, asking questions, looking at the facts, and thinking critically have never been more important. It is not about tearing down beliefs. It's about building them up with a stronger foundation of understanding. By becoming thought detectives, we embark on a journey of exploration and discovery. We uncover hidden truths and we gain deeper insights into ourselves and the world around us. So I encourage you to embrace the power of curiosity, the courage to question, and to find the joy of discovery. I encourage you to be bold in your pursuit of truth and open-minded in your engagement with diverse perspectives. Together, let's go on a quest for knowledge and understanding and be confident in the transformative potential of asking questions, looking at the facts, and thinking critically. After all, it's through this process that we not only enrich our minds, but also deepen our connection to each other and the vast tapestry of human experience. So go ahead, ask questions, look at the facts, think critically. Your journey of discovery awaits. I'd love to continue this conversation over on Substack, so listen, I'll explain in just a second how you can connect with me there. Thanks for listening to Life Repurposed. Would you like more? Check out the Life Repurposed magazine on Substack and get resources, weekly musings, and conversations with others. Just go to liferepurposed.me.